Okay, hi folks, Steven here. So, let's see, we should be getting started here in a moment. I'm still waiting for Anne to get by. We did do a test stream earlier, so I know she's around. It's probably just something came up and she'll be here momentarily. But just to sort of give folks an introduction here, tonight is going to be our discussion of the music of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Red/Blue Rescue Team. So this is it's actually split across different generations because Red Rescue Team is on the Game Boy Advance, Blue Rescue Team is on the DS, but they are designed to connect with each other and stuff like that. We'll be primarily talking about the music of it. Prior to that discussion for a few minutes, I'm expecting we'll talk a little bit about the absolute avalanche of Pokemon music stuff that has happened in the last week or so. I did talk about some of it with my Pokemon Go Fest post-discussion live stream on Monday. But of course, there's also, there was the Take It Home from Mabel. And there was also, earlier this week there was a music-related event in Pokemon Masters, and then of course we also have Pokemon Unite, which I've played a bit of. We may talk a bit about that a little bit later. Like I said, right now I'm just waiting for Anne to get in here. So let's see. I do hope that her internet is usually pretty reliable. So I don't know that it's that. I'm sure she'll be around momentarily. Let me just double check my email here quick and make sure she hasn't sent me something like, terrible has happened with her home internet. Okay, doesn't look like it. All right, so hopefully she'll be around momentarily. But yeah, that's sort of the schedule for tonight. Of course, after we discuss the game music. And by the way, I forgot to mention, of course, this is the one Pokemon side game, at least that I can think of, that has a full-blown remake. So we'll definitely be looping some of that in there. And Anne has popped into the chat room there. It looks like she's about ready. Let me toss her in the stream there.
Sorry,
looks like
I
you're getting
went
a
to the
few things
wrong
ready
test
there.
yard.
Yeah, so Anne is, unfortunately, there's not much we can do on her end. I hope our volumes do sound good here. Please let us know in the chat room if it is one way or the other. Unfortunately, I would usually turn up Anne on my end, but that doesn't seem to be, my computer does not seem to be cooperating. I won't give you the full story on that. It's a bit of boring technical stuff that I don't fully understand myself. But Anne, before we get into our main discussion, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share on Take It Home by Mabel, or any of the other musical stuff that's happened in the last week or so in the Pokemon world? It's been very busy.
I mean, it feels a lot like back when, what was it, the first movie came out, and we kind of got that soundtrack with a bunch of songs that, like, we didn't always feel like they were 100% related to Pokemon. That's where I feel about Take It Home. It's like, the music video, there's Pokemon in it. I'm not sure, but it's very cute. I love the, I don't know, the design of the video and the costumes and the hair and the sets. They're very lovely.
Yeah. Lyrically, it's what I call a stealth Pokemon song, which I assume this was written for this project. It may have been an existing idea, but I think it didn't really get down to paper and pencil and sheet music until it was selected for this, probably. But it's got some good lingo in there, like champion is definitely in the lyrics there, so it definitely fits on that vibe. And the video is nice too. It's not getting nearly as much attention as Electric did, so I'm not sure what this is. I don't expect. The one thing I really wonder is whether any of these songs will tie into the dub of Secrets of the Jungle, which we are still waiting for some sort of word on there. So we'll see where that ends up going.
Indeed,
I don't know
yeah,
if you have any thoughts in that area.
Well, like I said, it feeling a lot like the first movie kind of soundtrack situation, and like the M2M video it would be, I think, very fitting for a CD to come out commemorating Secrets of the Jungle that has all these songs that they're putting out for the 25th anniversary. So it's a thought anyway.
Yeah, it does. It is a bit, it would seem to give them a better justification for spending whatever Pokemon side of the business is and stuff like that to have all these things made and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Like I said, I do expect, for those of you who aren't aware, Secrets of the Jungle in the Japanese version has a number of insert songs in there. So it's interesting. I mean, if you look at some of the details of the music videos, like Katy Perry's Electric is shot in Hawaii, which is a very tropical, not necessarily jungle setting, but very much very much in the same wheelhouse. We also have a similar thing with this one in regards to, if you look at the TV show that Mabel is watching on there, there's a Celebi and I guess a Gigantamax Pikachu, which is kind of interesting.
Foreshadowing?
So it's interesting to speculate there. I mean, prior to this whole thing, I would have assumed they still would have probably replaced most of those songs with stuff like what they did with Walk Off the Earth for Pokemon Journeys. So, all right. Well, I think we've given folks enough time to come in here. So the way this works is that we do a discussion of mostly the game's music. With at the very end, after we do an outro, we'll do a bonus segment where we talk about the game mechanically and some of its reputation and stuff like that. I think this is the Mystery Dungeon games, with all due respect to all the other side games, which also have some very good music. This is one I've wanted to get to for a very, very long time. So this is pretty special to me. But we're going to go over the usual stuff we do in these discussions. So I think with that being said, let me go ahead and boot up my recorders. Let's see, I need to change folders on here because it's still got the stuff from my live stream, the stock music that I use for my solo live streams to make the pauses a little less awkward. But in this case, I use it to record Anne's side of the discussion, and I have a separate recorder that's used to record my side of the discussion. All right, get those booted up and adjusted. Let's see here. Okay. Well, I will start recording on my side. Anne, are you ready to go?
I am.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's see, did I put that? Yes, I did put that in the correct thing there. All right. So we will leave a bit of a pause, and I'll do my introduction. Let me punch up my notes just so I have that there. Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and we're doing yet another Pokemon side game music discussion. We're working our way through Generation 3, the Ruby and Sapphire generation. And we've made it to, with all due respect to the other side games, which also have very good music in many cases, a set of games that I've really anticipated ever since we started this. This time we're going to be talking about the music of Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, Red and Blue Rescue Team. So this is a pair of games that are split between the Game Boy Advance Red Rescue Team and the Nintendo DS Blue Rescue Team, which is kind of an interesting arrangement. But of course, it's the first in the Mystery Dungeon Pokemon side series. So this side series is beloved not just for its music, but also for the story and gameplay. Obviously, we will be mostly talking about the soundtrack there. let me get a few basic facts out of the way before we get too deep into this. This was originally released in Japan on November 17th, 2005. Let's see, it was released in North America in September 18th, 2006. Australia later in September. European Union was in November of 2006. And then Korea got that in August of 2007. And I should also mention that if you want to play the original versions of these games, as well as I believe the Explorers Mystery Dungeon games, I believe all of those are available on the Virtual Console on the Wii U. Not the original Wii, but the Wii U. And in a little bit of a twist on this, this is, to the best of my knowledge, the only Pokemon game, or I should say, this is, to the best of my knowledge, the only Pokemon side game that has a remake. Back last year in March 6th, they released Mystery Dungeon Rescue Team DX, or something to that effect, but it's basically a combined remake of Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team. That makes it very special and kind of shows the power of the Mystery Dungeon sub-series. But, Anne, I'm kind of curious. This game is classified, but Anne, I'm kind of curious. This side series is classified as a roguelike. I'm kind of curious if you had any experience with that type of game before, or what your thoughts were when you heard about this game back in the day.
Have I had experience with a role-playing game? Yes.
No. I think it might be a little unfamiliar. I'm sorry about this term roguelike. So a roguelike is a game. There was originally a game either the late 1970s, 80s that was big RPG called Rogue. Really creative stuff like that. It probably was done by two people, probably honestly or a hobbyist skill. But it follows this where there are randomly generated dungeons. You walk on the character. The goal is to get, I think the original game sort of artifact that you're trying to get to deep within the of the game. But that sort of thing. It's a dungeon crawler with randomly generated floors. So yes, roguelike and RPG are not the same thing. Pretty much all roguelikes are RPGs, but not all RPGs are roguelikes. Okay? Do you want me, Anne, to rephrase the question?
Well, you broke up
Sorry
a lot
about that.
during that, so I'm still trying to follow the question. So just for the sake of clarity, you said rogue play, not role play, right?
Roguelike is the name of the genre there.
Roguelike. Okay. Then yeah, no,
Yeah.
I don't think I have had experience in the sense of knowing that term. I do believe I have played games like this before, though, because it did not feel unfamiliar.
Okay, so let me sort of rephrase that then, and we'll kind of work from there. Sorry about that. I had assumed that you kind of anyway. We'll just move past that, and I'll kind of move forward. So I'll just rephrase the question. So, Anne, why don't we start off with kind of your first impressions and stuff like that? This is a roguelike, which is a subcategory of the dungeon crawler. So, Anne, I'd kind of like to get your impressions of this game when it originally came out. First of all, it's a roguelike, which is sort of a subset of the RPG genre where you go around what's usually a randomly generated dungeon, combating monsters. The actual name of the genre comes from the original Rogue, which was like a late 70s or early 80s text-based computer game that used similar concepts. But I'm kind of curious, did you have any experience with this genre beforehand, or what did you think about when this game originally came out?
Well, as far as when the game originally came out, I mostly just thought it was fun. I'm not kind of as into gaming enough to know what these terms mean. So I do believe I was familiar with these types of games and dungeon crawling and the like, but not enough in the sense that I would know that that's what you call it and be excited because it is this type of game. I picked it up and I played it, and it was a great deal of fun. It wasn't, I guess, a little different than anything Pokemon related that I had played before, and that was new and exciting.
So I had played a port, I guess, of the original Rogue on a computer that someone had ported to, I guess, the Macintosh platform. It's obviously been ported many times. There are many similar games, and in fact, Mystery Dungeon itself predates this Pokemon iteration by at least back into the Super Nintendo era in the 90s. So it does actually go back a fair way just within the Mystery Dungeon series, and there are other entries in it. So I kind of knew what to expect when this came in. To be honest, the main thing I kind of knew to expect that the difficulty would be pretty brutal going in. Now, it doesn't have the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games still aren't as difficult as some of the stuff you'll see in like the original Rogue and stuff like that. It is geared more towards the Pokemon franchise and the expected sort of difficulty curve there. But overall, I did enjoy it. I played it a lot, as well as the sequels that came afterwards. So I have to say I really enjoyed it. I'm not sure when it sort of gained the reputational scope within the franchise. I mean, aside from I guess you could make an argument for Pokemon Go. This is the biggest side series in the entire Pokemon franchise. But I don't know at what point it sort of reached its sort of, I'm not sure how to transition there. Give me a second to think. But let's see. I'm not sure at what point, seeing as how it's probably the biggest side series in Pokemon, not counting Go. I'm not sure exactly when it reached that point, but it obviously made an impression on the broader fan base and stuff like that.
Oh, definitely.
All right, well, with a new side series, it may not be surprising, we have a new company and a couple of new folks to talk about. As far as the company that did the development of this and most of the other Mystery Dungeon games, there's Spike Chunsoft. I think some people might pronounce it Chunsoft. It looks like the official pronunciation is Chunsoft. I'll try and stick to that. But in any case, I do know that they were founded in 1984. They are notable for having worked on the first 5 Dragon Quest games. So I believe that would be all the ones that were on the NES/Famicom, back when it was known as Dragon Warrior, and at least one on the Super Famicom. You may also know them from Warrior's Way, which is one of the 3DS Street Pass DLC games. And apparently they're also a Japanese publisher for some Western-developed titles. They're still active in that area as of late. I found out that they did, the Japanese publishing for Cyberpunk 2077. So they're definitely active within the last year or so in that realm as well. And did you have any thoughts on Chunsoft?
I don't have a lot of thoughts on Chunsoft. It is a kind of just interesting in the sense that, yeah, we're kind of moving into a different company to work on these games, a different, sensibility approaching these games. And again, I don't want to read too much into it, but you can definitely see a different mentality in Mystery Dungeon than many of the games that came before. So that is an interesting thing to notice, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely some framing differences, and it takes some risks that the main series games and even other side games generally wouldn't take, which is fairly interesting. It ended up being kind of a little bit, not a completely blank slate, but certain parts of it were, I guess, available that wouldn't be otherwise. Mm-hmm. All right, well, there were 2 main composers who worked on this game. There's Aratoshi and Asushiro Ishizuna. I hope I said those about right. Now, we were able to find a bit of information on one of them. Arata Iyoshi, I found out some of his other credits include, let's see, Beat Mania, Ninjala. He also has some solo work, and in fact, he put out a, I guess, not game-related album last year in 2020, so he's certainly active there. And what did you find out about Arata?
Yeah, so Yoshi here, he's got a sound studio called Sheen Sound Design, and he's got a Twitter, Arata_SS Design, and that is worth checking out if you're really interested in music. He does seem to write almost exclusively in Japanese, but a little Google Translate can help you a bit. But it's got links to like a bunch of blogs that he runs, his studio site, and it looks like he kind of tweets a lot about like the equipment he uses. It looks like he offers up some snippets of music that he allows other people to use in their projects. Obviously subject, you can't monetize copyright works and things, but you get to use them. So if that's kind of your scene, he might be worth checking out. And I listened to his album. Let's see, I think is it the Ethnoplex album? Yes, Little Wing from that. I listened to a bunch of songs on that were really quite lovely and kind of, I could see some of his influences here in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon.
Yeah, so some interesting stuff out there. If you like the music from these games, I think that sounds like a pretty good way to sort of learn more about that particular composer. All right, and then the other one, let's see, Atsuhiro Ishizuna. We were not able to find as much information. That's not to say he hasn't done anything else. He definitely has. One of his most recent credits that I was able to find was on, speaking of genres named after the games that created them, the Metroidvania game Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. This was a Kickstarter game that has actually has a couple retro throwback games and then one main modern platform game, which is, I believe, the Ritual of the Night game. It's sort of a spiritual successor to Castlevania Symphony of the Night and other later Castlevania games like that. But, Anne, was there anything else you were particularly able to find there?
Not much. I do have like a credit that he's a member of the Noisy Croak company, a sound production company. But yeah, mostly this guy seems to be a very low profile, like either we're looking in the wrong places or maybe he just likes by choice to not be a huge public figure. The one picture of him on the internet, he's not even looking at the camera. He might just like to sit and do his work.
Some musicians are like that, especially if they're not, touring musicians and stuff like that. They like to be known by their work rather than their face, even regardless, not a judgment on their face or anything like that, but they'd rather have that be out there than be in front of the camera and stuff like that. And that's that's a fair choice, especially if, like I said, you're going to do works for hire. Both of these seem to be, rather than Chunsoft like employees, they seem to be contractors who have done a lot of different things. So usually the next thing we talk about is kind of an overall style for the music of the game. There are some definite through lines in this and also the Mystery Dungeon side series as a whole. However, this has really a fairly diverse palette. There are a lot of different genres we'll talk about with songs we talk about on this one. And I assume that was your observation as well.
Could you repeat that last bit? You cut out on the last question.
Okay.
But yes. Oh wait, you're talking about how the very different influences and different genres, right?
So yeah, basically what I was saying there is that the music in the game is not, well, there are some through lines and some trend lines in it. It is not beholden to a specific genre or an overarching style nearly as much as some other Pokemon side games we've talked about.
I would agree with that. Yeah, there's definitely some through line on kind of chiptune style music, and I can see a lot of Arata Iyoshi's music, like his kind of new agey, very melodic sensibility. I can see that now that I've listened to some of his albums, some of his personal work. But for the most part, you're right. It's a wide swath of different types of musicality.
Now, the other thing we kind of got to talk about here is from a technical perspective, this is a little bit of a fusion of styles that way. Sort of the reason for that is that, well, so to sort of clarify that, remember this is a game that exists both on the Game Boy Advance and the Nintendo DS, and I guess if you count the re-release, the Nintendo Switch, as a result, I think they were a little constrained, and they had to make sure that all their compositions worked, technically speaking, on both the Game Boy Advance hardware as well as the DS hardware. Yes, technically the DS does have most of the Game Boy Advance hardware, if not all of it, in there for backwards compatibility. And in fact, if you own an original or light DS that has both the DS and the Game Boy Advance card slots, you can actually communicate between the two games, as some titles can. I think that also affects, because like you'll hear instruments that are very clearly very lo-fi, that are sort of like from the backwards compatible sound hardware within the Game Boy Advance itself, the very basic, like triangle and sine wave channels. But you'll also hear sample channels for sampled instruments, and actually those tend to be a little bit more, those tend to sound considerably better on the DS, just because the DS has better sample architecture for that. That was kind of a mouthful, Anne. I don't know if you noticed any of that or wanted to comment on it, but...
Well, I'm nodding like I know what you're saying, but this is definitely your area of expertise. But that's kind of, I don't know, that's very interesting, and like that this game is kind of, I don't know, that it has, I guess, just a unique quality to both its technical hardware as well as its story and its sound and like all the other things that make this game very unique.
Yeah, the sound, especially on the DS, is almost like someone, hardware-wise, mashed like an NES and a Super Nintendo together and had them sync up with each other to produce sound. And, we'll discuss how limiting that was, how that kind of works, but it definitely affects the overall musical tone of the game. And I wanted to very much point that out, that they had to maintain some level of compatibility, and that seems to have been reflected on a technical level. All right, well, we've done what we usually do. We did take a little bit of a break last time around with Pokémon Trose, but this time we're back to our usual formula. Anne and I have each picked out 3 songs, and we're going to go through them. Let's see, I picked the main theme of the game, the Sinister Woods, and the Great Canyon tracks. And what did you pick?
I picked Dream, Silent Chasm, and Escape Through the Snow.
So yeah, chronologically, we only kind of cover about the first third to one half of the game, so we will spoil a little bit here. There's a lot of stuff we could have picked out very easily. There's a ton of material here, as those of you who have played the game certainly know, but we still decided we had to kind of keep it to our usual 3 each, just to sort of maintain some level of sanity. But appropriately enough, we're going to start off with the main theme, and I have a couple different adjectives and other stuff for this. I gave it, one word I used to describe it was kind of jaunty, but it has kind of an up and down quality, and being that this is the sort of main theme of the game, and there's been many more games in this sub-series since, it's not surprising that it's used in various forms throughout the game. But, obviously in a game like this, since you're going to many diverse places and stuff like that, and there's a lot of walking in this game, I think the jaunty adjective fits pretty well. Anne, what are your thoughts on that?
I really like that you use the word jaunty, because that seems to sum it up quite quite well, and it's just got a nice little energy to it that just kind of speaks of adventure, I guess, and exploring and I don't know, moving, going out and like having a little pep in your step.
Yeah, and the up and down quality sort of ties into that as well. Both in terms
Hmm.
of the gameplay and also kind of the story and stuff.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to point out here, and this is a theme that goes through even the modern or the more recent like 3DS Mystery Dungeon games, is the Celtic influence. Unfortunately, I'm not the biggest like um, expert or anything on Celtic music, but with the instruments that are used here, as well as in a number of other tracks, that is one of the through lines through here as well as through the series. And I don't know how much of a Celtic music expert you may or may not be, but what are your thoughts there?
I wouldn't call myself an expert, but I do listen to a lot of it. Um, yeah, I don't. Some tracks are definitely a lot more strong in that vein than others. But yeah, definitely a lot of, again, the way I really feel like Arata kind of has this um, kind of just in the way he composes in general, but like, yeah, a lot of the little trills and arpeggios and just the way the chords work in some tracks. Again, I don't feel it as much in this theme as I do in some others, but uh, I I want to say Dorian mode, but I'm probably wrong. But there are like the ways Celtic chords work that just is very specific to that genre, and it just creates a feeling inside of you that's unique. And a lot of tracks in this game just have what could sounds like very stereotypical and evocative, but then like some note in the chord just changes it a little bit, and then it just creates a different feeling. So I yeah, I can see how a lot of people like feel the Celtic influence coming through these very like video gamey chip tuney tracks.
Yeah, so definitely wanted to point that out. Uh, in a way, I think we'll be bringing this up later. It does sort of match with some of the stuff in Sword and Shield. I think particularly the stuff in the Crown Tundra DLC, which is from kind of that area of the world. Um, more than obviously the other Pokemon games. So I think not sure exactly where I wanted to go with that. Let me try and rephrase that a bit to give you another option in editing. But yeah, and I think later it does kind of also stuff, especially in like the Crown Tundra DLC for Sword and Shield, and I think we'll be bringing up some of that later. But I think a good opener to the game, and it does appear in a number of other things there. I think it's almost certainly part of the end credits, but gets the game off to a good start and grabs your attention to this new side series. All
Hmm.
right. Well, and the first one you picked is Dream. Now, speaking of Dream, the quote I have for this one is "Toss and turn." Why don't you go into this one? Why'd you pick it, and what struck you about it?
Yeah, so Dream is kind of it's the track that plays when your character is having those dream sequences where you kind of get Gardevoir's backstory, not to spoil things too much. Um I really like it because it's a track that is both like really sweet and kind of relaxing like you expect for a dream, but then it also goes places where it is slightly more somber and can allow for a bit more serious conversation to play out, like they kind of end up having with God of War at points. So toss and turn is an interesting way to describe it, but yeah, like it kind of goes to a little bit of movement and a little bit relaxy, a little bit sweet, a little bit heavy, and just kind of keeps going back between like those tones with these very interesting little bells that add a weight to the track. And yeah, it can kind of take you to a place where you're both happy and you're both relaxed and also maybe a little bit sad. Um, and I picked it for that because it's a track that is both what you would expect from something like Dream, like it doesn't feel wrong, but it's also doing a lot of things you don't expect.
Yeah, and I should point out that the tune used here is I think the underlying melody, the D D D D, and then the sort of, I'm not sure exactly, the shimmer is maybe not the right word, but is also used actually a little bit earlier in the game during the personality survey, which is a major part of most of the Mystery Dungeon games. Although in more modern games they do let you skip it if you want to directly select your starter. But yeah, one of the reasons I put down Toss and Turn is just because it's sort of trying to make sense of something that isn't quite fully formed, as many dreams are. They don't quite always make sense. They often don't, actually. And some of that is neurological. Certain parts of your brain are active when you're dreaming and work in different ways than they do when you're awake. Any other kind of thoughts on that one, Anne?
I think we've kind of said it. Like it's just it's a very interesting track, which like doesn't seem like really high praise in a whole soundtrack of interesting tracks. But I thought it had some very unique qualities to it that made it stand out a bit.
All right, well, why don't we go on to my second track then? That is Sinister Woods. And I should point out that a lot of these tracks, particularly the ones that are used in the actual dungeons, are shared between multiple dungeons. Sinister Woods is used in a couple other places. But sort of the notes I had for this are the word menacing, and actually the thing that struck me the most about this one is sort of the chaotic strings, because it starts off, there is this sort of, you feel like something could be coming at you from anywhere, which is obviously kind of the thing in a dark-ish forest, something you have to sort of deal with. And then the strings come in, and they're just like, sort of reflect a certain amount of, I mean, I said chaotic, but chaos in there. Anne, how did this one kind of strike you?
Well, it was very interesting because in some places, especially at the beginning of the loop, it doesn't feel sinister. It feels very mysterious, and it's got a lot of higher notes and like a lot of instrumentation that gives it almost a discovery quality. Like it's an enchanted wood. Maybe it's a bit good. Maybe it's a bit bad. I don't know. We're discovering. And then the violin comes in and it's sinister again. So it is a track that plays with you a little bit. Chaos is definitely a good way to describe it. It does feel like anything could happen. You could get lost out here in this enchanted woods. You could get led away by the fairies. You could end up in a Pokemon battle and fight for your life. It's a lot.
Yeah, so I do kind of like it. I'm not sure, to be honest, the radio person in me, it may not be the best radio track because it is supposed to be rather unsettling by design. Because, whenever you're in a dungeon, you're never really safe in this game. And that's one thing you'll find is that most of these dungeon themes are not super triumphant, happy places. That's mostly reserved for the town that's in the game and the rescue team base and stuff like that. Because you're never really safe in one of these games. But that is what kind of struck me there. It's also, like I said, used in a couple other places. I think it's the Buried Relic later in the game also uses it for like the first part of it at least. And I also want to kind of call this out. In the remake that came out last year, some of the samples are, the tracks are actually pretty faithful, but a lot of the sampled instruments are noticeably improved. And I think the string sample, the string part here sounds a fair bit more natural. Not quite up there with, I can tell it's synth and not a real thing there. But I think it adds even more personality to this track in the remake that came out last year. All right, well, Anne, let's talk about another one of yours. This is Silent Chasm. Let's see. I put down that it was had a very echoey feel to it. What were your kind of thoughts?
Yeah, my first thought was that this is less silent than I would have expected. But I think kind of how it conveys that silence through sound through a musical track is that there's a lot of times in this track where instruments will just drop out and kind of highlight um, one one or two little trills of instruments or an instrument that's carrying the melody, I guess. But like then it'll be like some really heavy bass and like music, and then drop out, and there'll be just kind of one instrument that sticks out, and there's a lot of vox synths of like echoey voices and things. So it does kind of give you a sense of like not even though there is sound all around you in a musical track, it does give you a sense of like being alone in like a ravine or something, and echoes and so quiet that only one sound sticks out, kind of a thing. So I thought that was very clever.
The main thing I noticed, I think you're right about the it. I would call it sparse structurally. It's like certainly not super lush or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I noted down the bells or xylophones or marimba, those types of parts in there, which is one thing. Those are very echoey instruments, I tend to think, and I think that gives it its feel. Did you notice that as well?
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this track to like convey silence with the use of sound. And I think, yeah, the instruments they chose are a huge part of that, because like as you say, the marimba and the xylophone, they're instruments where you strike and then it vibrates, versus like a string you pluck and it vibrates. But like there's just something about that hit, rather than say the blowing of air through a brass instrument, that's just very visceral, and like as it just conveys sound in a particular way that can suggest silence.
Yeah, I do wonder what what pops into a composer's head when they're told they have to write music for something that has like the word silent in its name, like this, like silent chasm here. Um, I don't know. It seems like there's a bit of a disconnect linguistically there, but they did seem to come up with something that sort of fits the bill.
Yeah, something like I said, just very clever.
All right, well, let's move on to my third track. This is Great Canyon. And I put down a few stylistic notes for this one. First of all, it has a Western migration sound and also possibly some Native American influence. Yes, there are some baggage. There is some baggage to the kind of the use of those terms and their place in history. We'll kind of set that aside for the time being. But this song gave me a real journey type of vibe there. It's got some really great low instruments and stuff like that. It's despite the fact that I used the word Western there, it does stand out. I think, at least, very much from some of the music we talked about with the Pokemon Coliseum and XD Gale of Darkness, which have a southwestern type setting and some definite Western tracks, but from a very different point of view musically than this one. And I'm sorry that was kind of a jumble of thoughts there, but what's kind of your opinion on that?
In a similar vein, it definitely, the second you hear it, it evokes like Western style music. Like you hear that and that's what you think, and yet it is something different as well. And I wrote in my notes like that. This is just some amazing layering of instruments in this composition, and like there's something about these chords and the flute sound that makes me feel like there's a little bit of Celtic but not in here, and like I said, it feels Western, but it also feels like something else, so that it's like you instantly get a feel for landscape and canyon and traveling across a great distance and towards the west and the sand, but also something that's very not stereotypical. It's its own thing. And yeah, like this music like took me places. It just felt so beautiful, and in some places, like I said, these chords are very special, and I would love to like look at the sheet music for all these instruments and find out what they all were, and what were all these notes in here, because they took me on a little journey.
Yeah, so that one has always stuck in my head. I know that like back when I was running PIRN back in the day, that this is one of the ones I definitely recorded off of my DS to put on the station, and it has stuck with me ever since. I'm not sure if any other ones in there uses. There might be one or two, but it's definitely associated. And this is, to be honest, a very important dungeon, if you can call it that, I guess, in the game. Because you're going to meet one of the important characters, a Zatu, who is, sort of a seer of sorts. So they're, like we said, some of the cultural aspects might be, in some cases, a little problematic. But we are kind of setting that aside for the moment. But it sort of does tie into that motif.
Mm.
All right, well, Anne, you have one more track you've picked out, Escaped Through the Snow. So we aren't going to spoil the whole game by any points, but there is part of the game where you and your partner, you're a team of two for most of the game, are on the run from some of the other characters after being, falsely accused of some stuff. But this track comes in during that arc of the story. Anne, what made you pick this one out?
Okay, so first of all, it's just beautiful. It's soft and it's delicate, and it just has a way of like evoking cold. It's such a beautiful, sweet little track, but it also, like, for Escape Through the Snow and for how heavy some of the stuff going on in this point of the game is, it feels less like, oh, high tension escape, and more like we have escaped, we're going to be safe now. And I thought that was an interesting choice, that rather than play into the high tension or the sadness, they kind of went for something that was a little bit more beautiful and bittersweet. So I thought that was an interesting choice.
Let's see. One thing I came up with the word for this was crystalline, because this is a snow level, of course, but it definitely does not go for anything remotely resembling holiday music whatsoever. And in fact, there are several snow dungeons or ice dungeons in this game, and none of them really actually go for that. Part of that is the sort of the musical direction of the game, because the holiday music is quite cheerful, and not that all the music in this game is sad, but it does, like we said earlier, try to convey that sense that you're never really safe whenever you're out in the dungeons. The dungeons are dangerous places if you don't know what you're doing. But I wanted to sort of compare that to the Crown Tundra expansion, which I think we've brought that up, is a rather similar to this in some ways, in terms of like instrument choice, and also, like we said, not trying to be holiday music in any way, shape, or form. It's more supposed to be like a desolate landscape. I assume, I hope you found those adjectives or whatever to be agreeable, and it sounds like you do.
I would totally agree. And I think there's definitely a theme going in a lot of the tracks where, I don't know, I guess the expected choice is not the route they took with a lot of these things. And again, that's just something about this game that makes it special.
At the same time, though, it does work for this place, like I said, especially since you are on the run there, and particularly in that part of it, you're in danger, not just from whatever Pokemon are in the dungeon, but some of the other characters in the game that are on your tail, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, there are to be honest, a ton of other tracks we could have chosen. I'm going to post up a comment that we got in the chat room. If that'll let me. All right. So one comment we got from RuneGate is thoughts on Sky Tower. So without spoiling too much, Sky Tower is one of the dungeons you'll go through towards the end of the main story of the game. There is a fair bit of post-content in this, as there are in a lot of modern RPGs. But Sky Tower, I just want to sort of talk about briefly, is sort of the last major dungeon in the main story of the game. And, there you're actually climbing up into the sky, and it has a very celestial feel. So not entirely dissimilar to the ice level we were talking about, but still going for something a little bit different. And do you have any particular thoughts on that track? I just wanted to sort of put that out there for just a moment.
Well, yeah, since it came up in the chat, I didn't have a chance to go re-listen and get a lot of detailed thoughts on it. But yes, it's just so uplifting and lofty, I guess. But I don't know, it's beautiful, and it's such an emotional part of the game. This is the part where we're all crying a little. It's a beautiful track.
Yeah, definitely one of the other stands out, and one I definitely recorded back in the day for use on the station. So definitely one of my favorites there. It's also another one that I think benefits a fair bit from the DX remake on the Switch, that they can improve some of the sampled instruments there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's sort of talk about our overall opinions on the music of this game. I have a few notes down for that. First of all, as we mentioned, although there are some through lines between some of the tracks, some places they go to several times musically, they really do a good job of having a diverse soundtrack here. And that's one of the things that's easier to do in video games that have a wide variety of settings like this one than, say, a more confined game, or especially like a movie or something like that is going to have a more confined soundtrack. So that, in a way, for a video game, that's something they can get away with a little bit more, but it's definitely something I appreciate. And we had sort of talked about this a little bit earlier, but I assume it's something you also really like about this game.
Yes. Yeah, I love that it is both... It hits a lot of, as you say, a lot of different genres, a lot of different moods, a lot of different locations, and yet it never really goes for the stereotypical choice. And it has a lot of influences from the two composers that are very much their own, and so it kind of makes the soundtrack as a whole its own beautiful thing. It's just so... I'm having trouble putting it into words, but it's a very creative soundtrack, and I can see why it moved so many people.
Yeah, and I also wanted to call it we've talked about sort of the melodies and stuff, but there's a lot of thematic elements. Obviously, the main theme that you hear during the intro sequence and on the title screen is used in a number of different tracks, and also throughout the series. The dream stuff there is also kind of shared with some of the with the personality survey. So there are some definite melodic through lines, but also most of the tracks, including a zillion we did not get to, 6 and even 7 is really not enough to do this game justice. But we didn't want to be here all night. But many of the tracks have very good, memorable lines, and that'll be a theme. Sorry to use that term again, but going forward, when we cover the other games in the side series, I think you kind of agree with that.
I absolutely agree with that.
So going again back to our technical discussion of this, it's also got that kind of, very low-level chiptune, but also sampled instrument combination, which I found very interesting. And that was, like I said, probably largely designed for largely the result GBA and DS release for this. Uh, and, I think generally they do a pretty good job of meshing those. There may be a few cases where it doesn't work quite as well, but I think it generally works pretty well despite that limitation. I don't know if this was originally envisioned as just a DS game or what, but do you have any particular thoughts there? I know you're not as hardware-based as I am.
Right, yeah. So I can't speak to the hardware. Like, as far as the final presentation, hitting me as a consumer, I agree. I think they did an excellent job with the situation they had and the technology they have, and it's very creative. It's very beautiful. I will say, like, is it okay if we talk about the remake yet, or are we saving that for later?
That is kind of the next point I wanted to bring up here, because the remake actually plays things very safe. In fact, if you listen to it, most of the instruments that were done using the low level, going all the way back to the original Game Boy sound hardware that was built into the GBA and therefore also available to the DS. That stuff, it might be a little bit clearer and a little bit different, but it's still pretty close to that. The real big change there is actually a lot of the sampled instruments. I think they tried to use roughly the same samples, but they sound better. They can do a little bit more with them in the engine. But they did actually, in that remake that came out last year, play it very safe. As opposed to something like when you have completely different sound hardware. Like my default go-to for a remake is always going to probably be Super Mario All-Stars on the Super Nintendo, where obviously the Super Nintendo and the NES have very different sound hardware, and thus they were kind of forced to. But here, they were able to sort of mimic that older sound hardware, but also kind of get the newer samples, which produces a very interesting effect. But it's also not a case where they rewrote everything to redo all the music from scratch either, which I find to be an interesting choice. And I'm not sure what your thoughts are in that area.
Right. So everything about the difference between keeping the same hardware, that's something I can't really speak to. But as for, again, the end result hitting the consumer, to me, the difference is night and day, and it makes me wonder, again, it sounds lovely and it's very memorable on the original Mystery Dungeon, but hearing the remake version with, again, those sampled instruments being able to kind of just sound full and just it just hits different and my heart hurts, and it's just it's just a very different feeling, and I love it. And I do wonder if in the middle of composing, if this is the sound they envisioned or not, or if it was something a little closer to this, because it's just everything, I can hear everything, and it's just a very different sound, but it's still that same original composition that's hitting you. So yeah.
Well, the hardware geek in me kind of wants to make actually a couple comparisons here. In that, if you're comparing just the DS version to just the sampled side of things between the DS version and the Switch remake, it honestly kind of reminds me there are a handful of games that were ported or had their music ported at least from the TurboGrafx 16 CD, a system that, because it's CD-based, allows you to use what's called Redbook Audio, which is basically the audio format that's used on audio CDs in-game. And when those ported to the Super Nintendo, there are a couple examples Rondo of Blood got kind of a port-ish on the Super Nintendo. That's a weird story in itself, or Valis 4, which are names. That second one probably flew nothing personal and directly over your head, and that's okay. Or it kind of reminds me of back in the day when pre-2000s, when computers, especially on the PC side, would have different sound cards where the Game Boy Advance is sort of the low level, maybe better than the built-in PC speaker, but not by much. And then the The DS is sort of the mid-range sound card, and then like the Switch is like that super high level, like full MIDI compatibility type of deal that has every little bell and whistle on there as a sound device, like something that's not even technically like more of a MIDI device than an actual like game sound card. So that's kind of how I feel about those, and how I sort of draw the line from like the GBA version to the DS version to the Switch remake in my head. So I don't know. It sounds like I figured that part of it would be interesting, Anne. I think I'm gonna have to re-listen to this several times as part of our discussion to get the full effect or the full understanding on that one.
Hmm. That's very cool. I'm glad you were able to explain it for us.
All right. Well, with that music portion of this, we do have one more third generation side game that we're going to cover, and that'll obviously be our next discussion. That is going to be Pokemon Ranger for the Nintendo DS. As far as North American release order, it did come a little bit, a few months after this one. And, that's certainly not as popular since it only really existed on the DS. But it definitely has its own little musical style and some thematic elements. And, it did tie into a movie we discussed a couple of years ago. Pokemon Ranger and the Temple of the Sea was kind of a loose tie-in. They also wanted, to make a big deal out of that one. Didn't go quite as far as Mystery Dungeon for sure. But that will be our next discussion. And like I said, it actually is the last third-generation side game, I believe, that we'll be discussing here. Okay. Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. All right, give us a little bit of time here, and then we're going to discuss the game, because we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about some of the game mechanics and story and stuff like that.
We're going to talk about the game.
But let me just make sure I take a look at my notes there. So this is going on, definitely a longer discussion, I think, and I think that's fine for this one. This like I said, not to disrespect the other side series, but they're which also have some pretty great music between all of them. But you can kind of see why this is, and we'll have some interesting stuff to discuss here. All right, so leave a little pause, and I will go straight into the game discussion bonus segment. All right, well, as impressive as the music is, there's a lot of game stuff I want to do here in this bonus segment as well. First off, Anne, it turns out you weren't super familiar with this term, but this is called a roguelike. As I kind of explained, this is that ties back to like a late 70s, early 80s text-based PC game where you would go around a dungeon that was randomly generated and so on and so forth. This game has many of those trappings with a Pokemon skin applied, although, the original Rogue especially is well known for its difficulty. This one still has some tough moments you can run into where your team can get wiped out relatively quickly if you, especially on like your first attempt. Did you have experiences like that?
There were a few places where I got stuck in a dungeon and like just could not get out. I'm trying to think of like where some of the I feel like the Grand Canyon the crap, what's it called again?
Great Canyon.
The Great Canyon, there we go. I feel like that was one place where I remember being stuck. But yeah, like I didn't find it terribly difficult for the most part, but you're right. Like there were definitely moments where it was just like, okay, I can't pass this dungeon. I can't get out of this area.
Yeah, definitely the original time I played through it, I at least a couple fails there. The remake smooths over some of the difficulty curve, and I actually kind of recommend that. Even though, like, if you have Wii U, the original games are on the Virtual Console there for pretty cheap. I actually kind of recommend that if you haven't played these games, that you play the remake instead, just because I think there's a lot of things that were improved in later Mystery Dungeon games that are carried over into that remake. I do want to point out, mild story / gameplay spoiler. You're going to fight the legendary birds in here, so it might be a good idea not to pick one of the grass starters as for your team there, because you are going to have some real issues if that's what you go with there.
We all love a
So
challenge.
there are some parts that can be very difficult, especially as you're still trying to learn the mechanics. The traps in the game can be very difficult to get around. I think that's something also that you have better options for in the later games to deal with. I'm sure you've had some encounters with the various types of those in the game, right, Anne?
Yeah. It's been a while since I've owned and played this game, but yes.
Yeah, so it can be certainly a fair bit intimidating in that regard, especially for a Pokemon game that is not regarded, even in the earlier days, as not the necessarily most difficult series. So another thing that gets a lot of talked about a lot is the story. Now, the story in the Mystery Dungeon games is always kind of follows a very similar arc, where you're a human that has been transformed into a Pokemon and then inserted into this world that consists pretty much entirely of Pokemon. There's eventually at some point there's some sort of existential crisis within the world. Just to kind of spoil it in this game, I guess, is that there's a meteorite headed towards the world that's going to destroy everything unless they can find a way to destroy it first. But the other games have some sort of similar mechanic or not even usually an explicit villain, usually some sort of disaster that's about to befall the world or stuff like that. And then you sort of play through the game. You have one partner for most of the game, and so on and so forth. So they do follow a very similar arc. But there's definitely some character interaction in there that I think, in many cases, goes above and beyond, certainly the first couple generations of games. I think, to be honest, part of the... as a result of the side series popularity, I think it has had a fair effect on some of the main series games in terms of trying to flesh out the characters more and stuff like that. And it's had some effect on the music probably as well. Not that the music was terrible. There's some great tunes in the earlier Pokemon games, but I'm sure it has pushed them harder and stuff like that on that end as well. But going back to the story aspect, I don't know, Anne, how do you kind of feel about that?
It's just very surprising, and I don't want to say like main series games don't have like nuanced plots and like very poignant things to say, because a lot of them do. But this was a game that just I don't know, maybe it's just from the playing it from the Pokemon's perspective, or I don't know, being a character who talks occasionally. I don't know. There's just something about it that feels very, very personal. And like traveling with a partner, like you get to feel something for the other characters and the NPCs around you that maybe you don't as much in the main series. And it just has a lot of very sad and personal feelings, like the part where they run you out of town, the part where you question in yourself if you are a selfish human who abandoned a Pokemon, the part where Gardevoir talks about their very complicated feelings towards their human trait. Like there's just so much going on in this game that is very relatable to us as humans in the world, that I think really resonated with the people who played it. It was sad. It was hard at times, and it didn't always resolve happily. And I don't know. It was a game that let you experience a lot of these very complicated things that the Pokemon world is perfectly set up to have us explore. So it was very special in that way.
Yeah, the human turned into Pokemon thing is interesting just because I think this is the side series that humanizes the Pokemon the most, which is an interesting thing to say, I suppose. Um, all right. Well,
I am always on team the Pokemon have their own culture and are a little bit more intelligent than the human characters give them credit for.
yeah, that's a discussion in and of itself. But let's
Yeah,
sort of talk about
right.
sort of some of the structure of the game. Most of the time, what you're doing, if you're not going through a story-based dungeon, you're completing missions that are either sent to your mailbox or taken from the board that appears in the to the east of the town square. Um, and there's all sorts of stuff there. Sometimes you just have to go in and find a Pokemon on a specific floor and rescue them. Other times you have to take some object to them or find some object that's on a specific floor. Sometimes what you have to do is the dreaded escort mission where you have to take a Pokemon to a specific Pokemon on another floor of the dungeon. That is one thing that I think the remake vastly makes a lot more fair. Um, I don't know if you had anything on the mission types you wanted to put out there, but I figured I'd sort of start with that outlay.
Escort missions are hard and sad and horrible. It's just go where I tell you. I was not good at them.
Yeah,
But it wasn't because of my problem. It was the character I was escorting's problem, I'll tell you that.
yeah. Yeah, escort missions can be pretty hard. The reason the remake is a little bit easier in that regard is that I think in the original game they're always like level 1, so just about any hit that your the escort E takes will result in a knockout, which means you usually have to have a lot of reviver seeds. They're not super strong in the remake, but over the course of the sub-series they've made them a little less frail, which is kind of nice there. Um, so they're not nearly as bad or as difficult in the later games and in the remake. The remake also has a number of other improvements, like being able to level up moves so that they become more powerful and more accurate and stuff like that over time. Is something they added in, like, I think the 3DS era is where they started adding that mechanic, and that's in the remake and stuff like that. Um, to continue talking about the remake, like I said, this is pretty much. I am still hoping maybe next year we'll get that Pokemon Pinball remake / expansion. I would love that. um, but the remake, I think, it obviously does the music a little more. It has more advanced hardware to work with than even the original DS. But the graphics in the remake, I do want to call that out. I think the graphics in the original are just kind of okay and fairly, to be honest, a fair bit on the bland side. That's something they definitely improved there. But the remake, sort of the progression of the series is that the first two games on the Game Boy Advance and DS use sprite-based artwork. The two games on the 3DS use 3D models. For the Pokemon in there. And then the remake does use 3D models, but it goes for, rather than a straight up 3D rendered art style like you would see in the mainline games, especially like Sword and Shield, it goes for very much a hand drawn / colored pencil look in there. What are your kind of thoughts in that area?
Well, they're all, I would say, other than the last one, the colored pencil, like that's the one that to me is the most unique. I'm not really like terribly bothered like one is better than the other. I do love that they're trying something new though, that each game kind of tries to explore something different. I think that this is a game that could get away with that a lot more than like there was such backlash in some of the main series games when they stopped being the sprite characters, or when they started changing the view so you're more of the 3D. And I admit, like, you expect like the main series game to look a certain way. I feel like Mystery Dungeon, just the nature of the game it is, has a lot more room to be creative and to be like, okay, let's try this type of this type of view, these type of character renderings. And like I said, to explore something very different.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the remake art style. It helps it set it apart because, when it first did the first 3DS one, Gates to Infinity, was there really, certainly before any mainline. It was definitely there before because it's based on the fifth generation Pokemon games. It helps set it apart from some of the other stuff, which I think we've definitely seen in some of the other side games, especially some of the mobile stuff like Pokemon Masters has a very different art style than some of the other stuff. So it definitely helps set it apart. I just want to call out to our chat room there. We've got Andrico just giving a shout out to the remake as well. Like I said earlier, I think I would, if you're getting into this, if you haven't played the original, like maybe you've played some of the later stuff or on the 3DS or whatever, I would actually say, even though it's going to, assuming you have a Wii U, it's going to cost you more to buy the remake on Switch, I think that is the best way to play this particular game. I think aesthetically, as much as I have a soft spot for sprite work, I actually really like what they've done artistically with the remake. I don't necessarily want the main series games to straight up copy that. Greetings from Greece. Thank you very much. We always appreciate it, especially since it is very early in the morning there. Um, but yes, but I really like that. It also manages to speed things up and streamline a lot of stuff and makes very good use of the additional buttons they have on the Switch and stuff like that. So it's a remake that doesn't pad things out really. It manages to run as fast or faster really. So I really recommend that. Okay, well there's one more thing we definitely got to talk about with this one. So we mentioned that they pushed this a little harder than some of the other side games. Well, when this originally came out, first off there was an animated, I guess you could call it a short. I think it was about as long as a regular anime episode. I forget exactly what it was called, but it has it starts off, it goes through the Scar Marine, or near the beginning of the game. It has that kind of thing to it. It's, like I said, it's sort of a special design for this one. There are more specials, at least for the second generation. I don't think they've done as much with the later ones. There was also a manga that tied in to the Rescue Team games, which was pretty neat. So they definitely pushed this one harder than some of the other side games have. So I wanted to sort of, put it out there. Would this be, we've talked about this with some of the other side series, would this be a good candidate if they wanted to do a movie adaptation or something like that? I think some folks had hope that there at least be like a TV series spin-off, since Pokemon doesn't really have that much of a proper spin-off, which is a bit odd for a TV show that's run as long and been as popular as it is. And what are your kind of thoughts there?
I mean, if there was ever a candidate, like, I would have expected Mystery Dungeon before Detective Pikachu. Since Detective Pikachu was a lovely smash hit home run, I can't see why Mystery Dungeon wouldn't be. Like, I think more than a movie, a TV show seems like it would be the perfect place for it, because the rescue missions can be very episodic in nature. And yeah, it does something that the main series anime doesn't do, which you wouldn't want them to infringe upon each other and like basically take each other's audience and ratings, etc. But because it is just a very different scenario than the rest of the Pokemon world that everyone else is inhabiting, the opportunities just abound for Mystery Dungeon to spin off into something. a children's novel series, I don't know.
I do know that some folks were a little weirded out watching the short with having Pokemon that are not legendary, mythical, or Meowth talk. So that was a little bit of an adjustment for there. One reason, I mean, going back to, if they wanted to make a CGI Mystery Dungeon movie, this is sort of I don't know if backhanded compliment is the right word. It's probably the whatever the inverse of that, somewhat hidden insult or whatever. But if you remember the reaction to Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution, some folks didn't like the CGI at all. But if you look sort of at the average, folks were generally okay with the environments and generally okay okay with the way the Pokemon look. They were not so great or not so thrilled, generally speaking, with humans. Those generally got the lowest marks when people review that movies. So there is a temptation there to say, hey, CGI division of Oriental Light and Magic, think this would be a pretty good project for you while you're still trying to hammer out what humans should look like in the CG. So before you ever try and remake The Power of One, maybe you could make it an original Mystery Dungeon movie or something like that, or an adaptation. As I mentioned earlier, the stories have this kind of very common arc where you're a human transformed into a Pokemon to solve and eventually some sort of catastrophe or whatever comes along and has to be defeated. They could certainly bring in some of the characters, like the Wigglytuff that appears in various forms throughout the series, and some of the other ones on there. Certainly the Kecleon. Shopkeepers you would want to keep those in there if you ever did an adaptation. But if you want to do something that would be, play to your strengths, maybe this would be it. I don't know. And like I said, I did kind of throw shade at OLM's CGI studio or department or whatever. What do you think of that?
Well, I would agree. Less in a sense of like the level of CGI being good or bad. Like I think I've said enough on Mewtwo Evolutions how I feel about that. But like part of the visceral reaction that of disgust that some people had like is based on the fact that this beloved movie that you're remaking has a very distinctive art style that we've grown accustomed to and love, in the same way that every time Ken Sugimori changes his character design, everyone kind of like goes in a tizzy that Ash looks different. Like, so to take that style out of, like, again, Mewtwo Strikes Back or The Power of One, or like these properties that have very visual images and very distinct styles already, to take it to Mystery Dungeon, which is a new situation, and it's all Pokemon, like, I think people would care a lot less about the quality. They'd be a lot more okay with exploring the Pokemon world with a new visual lens. So there's that. But as you say, the Pokemon and the landscapes just looked a lot better than the humans. Perfect place to play around to their strengths. So I think there's a lot working for it to make Mystery Dungeon a perfect vehicle if they want to try expanding their CGI department and like really, really pushing that part of the company. So.
Yeah, and technically speaking, they wouldn't have to necessarily go with the Pokemon art style that they use in Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. They could, take a page from that remake that came out last year and use that as the style of the movie. That's one thing, especially if this were to be a stereoscopic 3D movie. You look at stuff like Coraline or the Fantastic Mr. Fox. That using an alternative art style for the CG there, or stop motion in the case of some of those other movies, can really pay off and give you a very different feeling in there. So that might be worth trying as well. Maybe that was one of the reasons they went with that. Who knows? Mm-hmm. Certainly, if I were a movie studio and I were trying to pick from different side series, obviously there's the Snap sequel that just came out, but Mystery Dungeon would sound like a good candidate to me. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next. I don't think that like the next Mystery Dungeon that comes out maybe a year or two will be a remake of the Explorers trilogy or whatever you want to call it. I think they'll probably do something original and then maybe save a remake of Explorers until later this decade or whatever. But I think we're going to see more of it in the future. The remake sold about 1.5 million copies, which is certainly not Sword and Shield or Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee numbers. But I think we're going to see more of this side series in years to come.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I think that's going to cover Andrico. He or she seems to like the idea of being a CGI Mystery Dungeon movie, which I think would be a fairly safe choice. In terms of, there's definitely a built-in audience. Like I said, until you get to like Go, this is the most popular side game that has ever been on. By the way, if you're still listening there, Enrico, we'd love to hear more about some of like the musical products that came out in Greece. Like, I'm sure there's a localized version of To Be a Master, but what else there is in there is always interesting. If there are any weird commercial tie-ins or stuff like that, we're always interested in that and things like that. But thank you to everyone who came in for this. We always appreciate comments. If you're watching this on replay, please do give us some comments. I know that there is a ton of love and interest out there for the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon games, both just the games themselves and the music. And we would love to, definitely have stuff to talk about when we get to the later games in the series in our game discussion. We'll have plenty to talk about there, because I can think of a bunch more things I want to say about this side series. It really is sort of a point in the franchise that I think should get more attention as sort of shifting things around. And stuff like that. But thank you very much to everyone for coming. Anne, have you had a chance to put on another episode there? I know you've been pretty busy with stuff, but
I have one scheduled coming out hopefully tomorrow. But like maybe late tonight. I have to go to work in a sec, but depending on when I get off. So that's coming. So
yeah.
Yay!
Yeah. Bless you, Anne, for putting together the time to do these. I really appreciate that.
No, thank you for
you have a much tougher
schedule
than I do. So I really appreciate that and things like that. But until next time, when we should be discussing, unless there's a weird surprise drop of Secrets of the Jungle that we're not expecting or something like that, still waiting for the dub of that before we can really discuss that movie. But next time we should be discussing the first Pokemon Ranger game.
So exciting!